And what we saw in both Europe and Asia in the long 16th century was the monetization of social relations. Previously, in the feudal world or the pre-modern world, people worked because they had obligations to work for others, whether that's proper feudalism in Europe, which had mostly ended by that time in Western Europe, or some other form of corvée labor in China. Well, by the 1640s, most people in Europe and Asia worked for money and then spent money on the things they needed. Well, that monetization of the global economy was global. That is, it happened all at the same time all over the world because of the availability of silver. And in my own work on China, was repeated between 1980 and 2008. Between 1980 and 2008, or 1978 and 2008, if you want to give it clear 30-year, 3 decades long interval, China went from being a country that was fundamentally non-monetized. I mean, people lived and ate and consumed in work units to a fully monetized economy. And that fully monetized China, that end of the monetization of China, I think, is ultimately what caused the timing of the global financial crisis. Again, not specifically what sparked the global financial crisis, but the structural factor that led to the big changes of 2008, 2010.
Yeah, so just to summarize, so we try to convey the message as clearly as possible to the students. So all of these large sweeps of history that we paint on a very large canvas, right? You capture all of these large historical phenomenons with this core concepts of the core concept of longue durée.
No, that's giving too much credit to one concept, I think. But I view them all within that frame, within a structuralist longue durée framework. I mean, let me make this very concrete to Europeans. Something that everyone loves to disagree about is, what would happen if the Nazi Germans had conquered Europe? How terrible would it be? Of course, it would be terrible. There would have been even more genocide than there was. The Holocaust would have gone on. Lots of terrible things would have happened. Many people would have been killed. Would Europe today still be a totalitarian Nazi dictatorship? Or would it have broken down over time in the same way that the Soviet regime broke down? Stalin died, there was some reform, there was then some retrenchment again, and then ultimately the system came crashing down because it was unsustainable. Well, I think the latter. I think we can, now I can't predict, when would the Soviet Union have disintegrated? When would a Nazi empire in Europe have disintegrated? I mean, a longue durée approach won't tell you 1945 is the year, 1989 is the year. But, you can say within a couple decades, something will happen. And that's been the source of my own work on China. I said in 2011 that, growth in China is going to end by 2020. I can't tell you when, I can't give you a month. But I know the growth is coming to an end for structural reasons, not because of any particular policy. Now, the specific actions taken by specific politicians, specific times, will have a massive effect on individual people's lives. There's no doubt about it. But the overall shape of the world, I think whoever won World War II, the overall shape of the world would be pretty similar today. There would have been a lot more pain along the way, don't get me wrong. Would look a lot the same today. Just as ultimately, the Soviet experiment fell apart, and ultimately the Maoist experiment fell apart. And China today looks pretty much like just another repressive middle-income country. There's nothing particularly distinctively with Chinese characteristics about it.
Okay, I'm not going to challenge you on all of those claims because we don't really have time. I just want to get your view on the world system's perspective and some core concepts to enlighten the students. And already we have had a very enlightening discussion. And thank you very much for that. But I still would like to ask you one more question, actually. And that is in terms of policy relevance. How would a world systems approach inform policy? And is it by necessity Marxist?
It is by necessity Marxist, if by Marxist you mean, goes back to some of the key insights of Karl Marx. I mean, there are a few, but there are very few world systems analysts today who try to implement a Marxian understanding of economics as derived from Marx's Capital. But broadly, seeing the world in materialistic terms, seeing the world in structural terms, in terms of hierarchy, all of those kind of traditions coming from Marx, even the role of ideology, broadly speaking, world systems analysis is Marxian in origin. Now, that doesn't make it particularly Marxist politically, though there are many world systems analysts who are committed Marxists. It also doesn't mean that we all have to live by the methods that Marx developed 150, 170 years ago, right? I mean, science moves on, and Marx was very much a man of his time who would have wanted, I think, science to move on. He tried to be as current as possible, and I think we owe it to him to do the same. As far as policy recommendations go, certainly almost the entirety of the world systems world would identify themselves as being people of the left. And by that, they don't mean liberals. They mean of the left, that is, of the illiberal, or they may not use the word illiberal, but of the revolutionary left, let's put it that way.
Okay.
Personally, I'm not. I come much more from a liberal tradition, and so how I see policies is partly informed by my world systems background, but partly by others. I don't think world systems analysis has any specific policy recommendations. It's a it's a structuralist lens through seeing the world, and I'm a much more extreme structuralist, really, than anyone I know in the world systems world. I'm on the very structuralist end of that paradigm. I have lots of policy advice to people, but I don't think it particularly comes from that world systems lens. Look, the world systems lens, it's kind of like, learning a martial art. If you learn a martial art, you can use it for good, you can use it for evil, you can just practice with it, you can go out and, kick criminal butt with it, right? But the martial art itself is just a discipline. And in the same way, world systems analysis is in the end just an intellectual discipline that you can make use of if you have the inclination to do so.
All right. Yeah, in some sense, it kind of relates to the answer that an offensive realist that I interviewed gave to me. He answered more or less the same, that, okay, I might analyze the world from an offensive realist perspective, but that is not my normative stance.
Sure.
Yeah. But yeah, in any case, thank you very much for that answer. Yeah, before we leave, any advice to our fellow IR students at Malmö University?
Stay warm. What other advice do you give to someone in Sweden? Stay warm, enjoy the sunshine while you have it. If you're seriously considering a career in academia, then make sure you look at your career prospects early rather than later. Don't leave your career until the end of your degree. That's the one bit of advice I can give to any student anywhere.
Yeah, that's a very good advice, I think. Thank you for participating. It has been a true honor to talk to you. And thank you very much for your insights and answering the questions in this way, which I think will really help the students to make sense of the world system.
Oh, it's an honor to be asked. And anyone who wants to follow up, I'm easy to find online. Just Google Salvatore Babones. I'm the only one in the world, and I always love to hear from students.
Thanks again, Salvatore. Bye-bye.
Thank you.